There's a lot of Pokemon games, and the question is, can you solve the Pokemon timeline? The answer is absolutely not. The Pokemon timeline is the most complicated thing in the world. While people will think the Pokemon games are pretty obvious to solve, the true answer is no. Hi guys, my name's Yuki the Geekmas, and I'm a huge Pokemon fan. And I've always been curious about trying to put together a Pokemon timeline. And I've been racking my head this entire week trying to figure out how to put this timeline together. And there's just a sad reality. You can't do it. So today we're going to talk about why the Pokemon timeline cannot exist. Or at the very least, not an official timeline using all the games. So let's get into why the Pokemon games do not work as a concurrent timeline. Let's go. First of all, let's talk about the base point of the entire Pokemon timeline. Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow. These games are pretty firmly canon in every universe, except for the Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee universe. Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow always take place at the beginning of the timeline, primarily because of one simple fact. Because Red and Blue exist. Trainer Red and Blue showing up throughout the series firmly shows that Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow occurs. Now, Red and Blue does occur in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, but they have not been the ones who defeated Team Rocket and did not eventually finish that part of the timeline. So we have to say for a fact, Red, Blue, and Yellow seems pretty canon to every single Pokemon universe. Except for in the case of Fire Red and Leaf Green, which should be added. They are also very similar to Red, Blue, and Yellow. The only thing that's really different is the inclusion of the Sevi Islands, and of course Easter eggs towards the future Johto Pokemon games. So it would be very hard to not include them also on the timeline. Now, if I would be 100% honest, we have to look at Pokemon Yellow as the more canonical version of the Pokemon games, just simply because in future Pokemon games, Trainer Red is using all the Kanto starters, while in all the other versions of Kanto, Red only receives a singular copy of one Kanto starter. It's possible that Trainer Red did receive other starters down the line after the main events of the games, but so far it looks like Special Version Pikachu is officially the canonical version of the Kanto games. Now, a couple years later, takes place the events of Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal. We do know for a fact that these games are also canon to the main series because, of course, it shows Trainer Red and Blue years later after their adventures. Blue taking up the position of a gym leader case, ironically enough taking Giovanni's gym as his own. And of course, Trainer Red going up to Mount Silver in the search for Mew, or at least that's what the supporting media around it says. And it would not be hard to mention also for a fact that also Heart Gold and Soul Silver also can very easily fit into these games as well. Nothing too crazy has been changed or altered, except for the confusing placements of several NPC characters from other regions. Now, I'm not going to go and say that it's breaking anything, but I'm also not going to say it's fully canonical. Of course, so far so good. The Pokemon timeline's not broken yet. Of course, this is just the Game Boy era. What's going to happen when we get to the GBA era? Well, let's go see. Now, the next Pokemon games to discuss are Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. And before anyone asks, no, we're not quite ready to cover Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and we'll get to that later on. While those games have the same plot and general beats as the original games on the Game Boy Advance, they have a different universe or timeline. We'll discuss it when we get there. But no, Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald are all interesting games. First of all, it proves that the Pokemon timeline can never occur fully using all the games. Of course, Ruby and Sapphire are sibling games, rather having Team Aqua or Team Magma as the primary antagonists, but also Emerald version being the kind of pseudo combination of both plot lines, having both Magma and Aqua fighting each other, but both doing plans to revive Kyogre and Kyogre and Groudon, and of course, this time around you have to get Rayquaza in order to get them to stop fighting. There is a major problem with these games within the general timeline of Pokemon, and that is the fact that the only connecting force that sets these games on a general timeline is a game developer at one point in time putting out a vague text, which I don't like saying that those are, and I quote, confirmed data points, but also a in-game mechanic that doesn't firmly say where a game is setting on a timeline. See, there was a general timeline that was put out by a game developer years ago, and I don't firmly believe it, honestly. They are claiming that the events of Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald are taking place relatively around the same time as the Kanto games. I have a very hard time grasping this, in my own personal opinion, because there is not sudden... First of all, the dramatic events of Kyogre or Groudon rising from did not occur within the Kanto region. And also, at the same time, the true connecting fact, aka Bill's Transporter, aka the big thing he's working on in the post-credits of Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, is more a in-game mechanic disguised as a storyline to allow you to trade between copies of games. And that's kind of problematic. The thing is, in reality, there are no Kanto or Johto characters who show up within the areas of the Pokemon games at all. Now, there are characters who come from Pokemon Emerald version who actually have shown up in the future, but going across timelines. And this is the whole thing about it. Ruby and Sapphire really have no connecting force. Now, Steven Stone does show up in Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. And that would make sense with Steven leaving after you defeated him and him leaving you a Beldum at his house saying he's going on an adventure. But at the same time, Steven's the son of a rich kid. Honestly, him showing up at something like Silphco in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, or it doesn't really automatically seem like it's him on a journey. You would imagine him on a journey is going through caves or ruins. Him just showing up at generally something you would expect a rich kid from being sent out by his father to go to. To me, it just doesn't make a lot of sense, honestly. In my own personal opinion, Steven being there in Heart Gold Soul Silver is not confirmation that it takes place before or after. The only thing that really does solidify would be if you count the Pokemon World Championships within Black and White. And that's also kind of 50-50. I honestly, just for now, will say there's a probable chance that the Pokemon trainer from Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, no matter you choose May or Lucas, is maybe active roughly around the same time as Red and Blue. The only big problem is they have never officially showed up in a Pokemon game after these events, putting them as a hard to talk about topic. Moving on, of course, we do get to Brilliant Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, and also we might as well just throw Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl in, since they're such faithful remakes that they really don't step into the toe of the other timeline that we're going to be discussing very shortly. Diamond, Pearl, Platinum, of course, have always been pretty easily stated that they take place shortly after the events of the Johto games, aka Generation 2. And I am almost on the ground of saying that's correct. Except there is one thing that I always have felt kind of ruins this as a perfect fitting in the timeline. And it's the fact that if you actually look at how the TV presents at the beginning, because I did test this out, booting up Pearl, doing a new file on Pokemon Pearl, I did look at this. It doesn't fully come across as though this is a, and I quote, breaking story, but more as, let's say, one of those shows on Discovery Channel telling you about a report of something that maybe happened a couple years ago, or potentially just one of those documentary shows saying, like, oh, we found Bigfoot, it's over here. And let's be honest, honestly, it's just talking about a different colored Gyarados. Honestly, in this Pokemon world, the idea of different colored Pokemon shouldn't be too crazy of an idea. Now, I'm not fully dismissing that these games can take place roughly the same time of Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and of course the original Johto games. I'm just saying it is a bit hard to, Now, arguments will be yet again. With such as Generation 1 and remakes, along with Generation 3 games released within the same console line, the DS line would naturally also come on, being around the same time as the Generation 2 games. Also, to note, Professor Oak showing up here definitely makes it very likely this is some point after the first generation of Pokemon. You see, a big thing about this original the original DS era Pokemon game was always, where is Professor Oak? See, after the DS era, Professor Oak, after Generation 4, Professor Oak kind of completely disappears from the Pokemon series. While he did show up in the anime a lot after the fact, in the actual physical Pokemon games, Professor Oak does not show up basically at all, except for in remakes. After this point, Professor Oak is pretty gone. And, seeing him in BDSP was a good thing. Except for BDSP, I wish it could have been better. But, side to side. The thing is, I also will bring up that the supposed Game Freak development, the leak from the Twitter a couple years ago, did also put Generation 2 and 4 together. Yet again, the only thing is, there's evidence that doesn't firmly fit together here. I will say, maybe I'm being a little pedantic, but let's be 100% honest. It's not a perfect fitting, but it's close enough to not fully tear this part of the timeline apart. Then, let's get to the next gen. Generation 5, aka the Unova region, already has a pretty nice fact that we actually have connecting timelines. Black and White, and then a couple years later, Black and White 2. Canonically taken apart, I think, 2 years away from each other. Officially meaning that we are within a very easy to say timeline. We have not this firm timeline event since the original Gen 1 to Gen 2, which is very nice. I'm actually happy to see that we have this little nice timeline connecting the two things together. Now, what about connecting these back to the other generations? While we do have some, what I call white noise, now, I should put that term out there. When I call a white noise implication of timeline fact, it means more that it is a timeline event that sounds like it's very interesting canonical, but is actually basically white noise, basically being an Easter egg instead of it being an official timeline placement. And this is because Black and White, much like Ruby and Sapphire, were all intended to be kind of a fresh start for the Pokemon universe. Of course, people were fully excited for not having a lot of their original favorite Pokemon back in these newer games, so it does make a bit of sense that the Pokemon, that Game Freak kind of stepped a little bit backwards and said, okay, let's maybe rethink this. Let's rethink this whole timeline idea. And there's no issue there, honestly. But honestly, I think it's a fun little timeline. Personal opinion, of course. And it would be very bad to say that I don't disagree with the idea that these games could take place a couple years after the fact. First of all, you have the Go-Go Rocket guy from the Generation 2 games here as an elderly gentleman, and he's retired with a family. So that is officially saying that these games take place after the events of the original Generation 2 games. Also, we have the Pokemon World Championship. I almost almost would say this is a canonical thing and not a Easter egg event, except for all these trainers have their original sprite designs and they don't really look like they're a lot older. And Giovanni also showing up here is a bit of a stretching your opinion. I very much have a hard time saying if this is a canonical event. It does make things a little awkward, and also the idea of Giovanni showing up after being on the run for all these years is a little hard to swallow. Now, let's get into the part where the entire Pokemon timeline falls apart. Of course, that gets us into the idea of now we have to start talking about Pokemon X and Y. And the whole thing about the Mega Evolution timeline, which is a big issue here. See, Pokemon pretty much has a separate timeline, and we figure that out because of a remake that I skipped over earlier, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. This pretty much proves that games have parallel timelines and that the Pokemon have events that occur in both timelines, but one has Mega Evolution and or mechanics similar to Mega Evolution, and there's a timeline of events that occur without Mega Evolution. Every single Pokemon game we just got done covering before X and Y is in the what should be called the non-mechanic era of Pokemon. Meaning that Pokemon just battle and they don't have any other special forms, and that Pokemon are kind of just have regular battles, and of course legendary Pokemon that do things within the world when they're messed with. And then you have the Mega Evolution timeline that basically, because of the Pokemon War that is mentioned in X and Y, Mega Evolution energy and or other energy on this planet exist. Everything can kind of be brought back to the Pokemon War and blamed by AZ and his ultimate weapon. Thanks, AZ. And of course, that does bring us into the questioning of, well, does that mean that in the Pokemon universe there is a Mega Evolution timeline of Pokemon Red and Blue? And the answer is yes. And that is because we know for a fact, thanks to X and Y, that Red and Blue do exist. There is a gentleman who does have a bit of a Easter egg thing where he is a character. He says he talked to a guy, he told him to smell him later. But it also can fit firmly within our Pokemon Mega timeline. And X and Y more or less gets to be our point zero on the Pokemon Mega timeline. Now, obviously, there are other events that could occur within different universe, the same universe that would be the original events of the Generation 1 through 4 games. It just means that Mega Evolution exists, and that probably means that Cynthia had a Mega Garchomp. God, that's horrifying. And of course, that also brings us to the simple fact that Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire also has to find itself on a timeline. Now, there is some contradictory evidence within Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire that makes it hard to figure out if it goes before or after X and Y. A big issue is that there is a tree that is planted by AZ, and it seems like it looks like the design of AZ's Floette. Now, we firmly know now because of Pokemon Legends ZA that it is not dead. And also because we see the O-Man actually being created in Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, I am very easy to say for a fact that this man was probably Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire has to take place a year or so before the events of X and Y. But we need to also stress, not too far after the events of X and Y. And that's because our next game has an important character from Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire in it. And he's not significantly older, but some other characters are. So let's get into the next generation. Oh, Lola. You irritate me because you truly do make it very easy to see where we're going, but also you completely screw up our timeline as well because you have very interesting things. You see, Pokemon Sun and Moon and Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon really do break our line of parallel games. Because technically, whatever event is canonical within the Pokemon timeline means that these games more or less have completely different implications for our timeline. You rather have the original Pokemon Sun and Moon, which primarily focus around Solgaleo and Lunala, and Lumine's mother, or Luzamine, going completely insane and trying to combine herself with a Ultra Beast, or you have the events of Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, in which Necrozma is the ultimate bad guy, and Luzamine is actually trying to be the hero of the series, and she's not. This really does hurt trying to put on a timeline. Because truly, it doesn't affect future Pokemon games, but it also does kind of make it hard to say which one is more canonical. But there is some strange implications by saying Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon are technically canonical. So let's talk about what's great about Pokemon Sun and Moon. It's the fact that the battle tree is the ultimate. We have trainers from other regions. Now, all throughout the original Generation 7 games, you do see a lot of Gen 5 trainers definitely walking around the region, which is a great indication this takes place after Generation 5. But also you see a certain set of scientist assistants showing up in Generation 7 trying to give you Zygarde. That also means that this would take place after X and Y. Very easy to say that. And then the battle tree, like I said, has three important people show up that gives us a good idea on how much time is taking place in between games. First of all, Red and Blue show up here, and they're adults. Of course, Red is still not talking, but yes. And they're rocking teams that are pretty similar to their Pokemon Heart Gold and Silver counterparts. Meaning that these are the same trainers from that generation, but within the Mega Evolution timeline. Meaning for them, the timelines are different, except for they have Mega Evolution because Red is rocking Mega Charizard, Blastoids, and Venusaur, which is a huge shakeup to how we expected the Pokemon timeline to go. But also, it shows that Wally is here, and he's a few years older. Probably I'd say around his 16, because he's not significantly taller, but he's definitely much more mature, which is an interesting thing to see. Also, you have Ultra Sun and Moon with the ultimate time-liking event, the appearance of Team Rainbow Rocket. Team Rainbow Rocket being made up of teams. Giovanni's basically picking up team leaders who won against the protagonists in other generations, or that protagonist didn't exist. So that means, in reality, that we're in a world where this is a bunch of leaders who never really had opposition, and they pretty much won. Each one of them actually obtaining their chosen legendary Pokemon and rocking it. Which is interesting, because that means that in some of these worlds, the world is flooded, the world is all Earth, the world is rather destroyed completely and reformed into what a certain grumpy man wants, or there's one man who just has ultimate power. While this timeline is interesting, the conclusion to this event gives us an interesting realization that Pokemon Go almost fits canonically into our timeline. Not as part of the official Pokemon timeline, but the realization that with this technology, it's very likely that Giovanni, after being defeated in the Rainbow Rocket arc, decided to look for a new universe, and guess what he found, ironically? A universe with very little trainers, and he's able to get multiple legendary Pokemon, and he can turn them into Shadow Pokemon. If that's not Pokemon Go and their implementation of Shadow Pokemon, I don't know what it is. I'm not saying Pokemon Go is part of the Pokemon timeline. I'm just saying it's an explanation where Team Rainbow Rocket went. They became Team Go Rocket, and they ended up in our world. That's a theory, not canonical, but it sure as hell makes sense. Now let's get to the Switch era that definitely shakes things up a lot. Now, I very briefly am going to talk about Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee because they do exist within their own separate timeline. We know this because the Red and Blue in this universe did not defeat Team Rocket, and it's actually the brand new Trainer and Trace actually are the ones who took down Giovanni this time around. While their events are eerily familiar to us who played Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow back in the day, it is more canonically accepted that these are separate timelines, completely separated, but ironically enough, they have Mega Pokemon, which means that there is a Mega Let's Go, Let's Go Swirlix, Let's Go something else games here that take place because we know that the Mega of the Great Pokemon War event happened here, which means there's a Let's Go Terra game and there'd be a Let's Go Z-Move game. It's hard to put it on a timeline, but it kind of makes sense. But also, we do have characters from Pokemon Sun and Moon show up here. A certain artist shows up on a dock, meaning that there is a universe within this game that has Generation 7 characters. Also, there are a lot of Alola trainers who will trade you Alola Pokemon for your Pokemon in-game, meaning that the Alola region does exist. And during the events of after the events of Pokemon Sun and Moon, Luzamine does end up within the Kanto region with Bill, who got turned back into a Pokemon, meaning that also within this timeline, Luzamine might show up within this universe. Of course, Let's Go Pikachu has not had any future development since then, so it's kind of hard to talk about. Sword and Shield are very hard to talk about here because the Galar region really doesn't have a lot of strong connections backwards within the timeline. There are no prior trainers that show up within this region. There was hint that Mustard was talking to a trainer, but we have no strong connections. We actually have stronger connections to the Pokemon Pixel games, but that's just because literally Mustard's playing it on his Nintendo Switch. And that is strange that we do not have any really strong canonical connections within both the main game of Sword and Shield, but within the DLCs. No prior generation character shows up, and we really don't have any strong connections backwards in timeline. We do have a strange appearance of a Type Null. And with the legacy of Type Null and how it was developed, this could have been, but we also know for a fact that this is stolen research from Alola. And really, that is the strongest evidence we have that these games do at least take place within the same universe of the Alola games, because Type Null is here, but it's also a differently developed Type Null that ironically works exactly like the Type Nulls from Alola, meaning that this research came directly from the Aether Foundation. This is really the only connecting force, and it's thankfully future Pokemon games to help us connect backwards. But outside that, there's not any strong connections putting Sword and Shield close to any other Pokemon games in the universe. A very strange thing, but it's notable. Legends is kind of hard to put here. Hisui is a prequel to not just the Sinnoh region, but also it is a prequel to the entire game series. These games can comfortably set behind every single game in the timeline, before Pokemon Red and Blue, before Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, and before any other timeline placement in the game. These really don't even have a connection to the Mega Evolution or non-Mega Evolution timeline. These comfortably can set on any timeline and have no problems. So really, Legends Arceus is our one strong beginning of the series, and because of a future Pokemon game, ironically we're very close to that, meaning we're not too far away from talking about how these all come together. Now we're up to our most modern point in the timeline. Pokemon Scarlet and Pokemon Violet. And really at this point, we do have connections backwards with both series. First of all, in our history classroom in Scarlet and Violet, we do see a certain professor from Legends Arceus in actual picture form. meaning that he is officially part of Pokemon history. He's not just a character, he's actually a member in the history books. And on top of that, we do know that Penny is related to a certain adventuring man from the DLC in Pokemon Sword and Shield. That does officially mean that these games exist within the same vicinity of each other, but it does not mean that Pokemon games would officially be connected to each other how you would expect it to be. I don't have a problem saying these games, Sword and Shield, take place before these games, but at the same time, they don't have any other connecting facts other than the fact that cell phone technology, the Rotom phones, are pretty much identical, except for Scarlet and Violet can save your life, unlike the ones from Sword and Shield. So it's not hard to say that technically these games do take place. The Sword and Shield takes place before these. And, of course, that's the furthest point in our timeline. So let's wrap to our conclusion. So our big conclusion is that Pokemon games are not able to be all put into the same timeline. There are Pokemon games that definitely connect to each other, and then there's games that are assumed to connect to each other, both because of vague Twitter messages and also because of, well, circumstantial evidence to connect the games to each other. There is a mega timeline, there is a non-mega timeline, there's the Let's Go timeline with mega connections, and then before all of them is Legends Arceus, putting it truly at the beginning of all of these timelines, but not affecting any of them in a significant enough way. Also with the vague idea that because of Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, it means that our world and our world history also may or may not connect to these games in a way or form. Mind you, in early translations of Pokemon games, there are several states and locations actually mentioned, but that could be just seen as localizer errors or localizer Easter eggs, not officially data points. Now, do I think that also I should say some connecting games that really don't have any significance, such as Pokemon Colosseum and XD. Obviously, those two games are connected, but cannot comfortably fit anywhere within the timeline, basically because of the legendary dogs, the Ho-Oh and Lugia all being within those games. But in order to have Pokemon Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and the original Game Boy games make sense, it doesn't actually make sense to have those Pokemon in the Ore region unless they were stolen from our main trainer, which I don't see that happening. And also, let's not be too... It's also hard to say where the Pokemon Ranger games would fit. I imagine those all connect to each other, but not also connecting to these. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon also exists within its own little pocket dimension and really doesn't fit comfortably within a pre-established Pokemon timeline. They can all connect to each other, but they wouldn't be able to actually connect to the mainline Pokemon games. And of course, Pokemon Legends ZA will take place after Pokemon X and Y, but we don't know actually where they would take, or what time they'd be around. Would they be around the time of Scarlet and Violet or not? See, that's a strange thing because we really don't have a definitive timeline. At least, that's my own speculation. So guys, this is my why the Pokemon timeline video doesn't work. Sorry for such a late video this week. I've honestly been really busy and haven't had a little time to get to stuff. And also I'm working on my big Kaguya-sama project. If you guys like what you like Pokemon, hit subscribe because we'll be covering Pokemon Colosseum and Pokemon Legends ZA once those games hit. If you want to also watch me do some shiny hunting, I have a Twitch. So if you guys want to do that, it should be under the same as my YouTube on Twitch. So guys, thank you so much for watching. Geek out.